Okay, welcome back. In our last video, what we worked on was creating the ability to edit a user. So where we got to was we had our table view, we added in a button, but it's disabled. And when you click on a person, it enables the button. And when you click on edit, it'll bring us into this view where we can edit the volunteer. It's preloaded with the data, but the image at this point was not updated. So what we need to do is we need to, in our preload method, we need to add in the ability to preload this image. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our user view controller. Probably should have just called that, I don't know, volunteer view controller or something, but what's done is done. Well, you can leave that for now. And here we can load the image. What we'll do is we'll say try. And remember, if we have, for our image, we have something called image file. We've created a file object to store the image. So let's update that to point to the image, sorry, my apologies. We also had this idea of a volunteer. So we can ask that volunteer to provide its image file. So what we'll do is we'll say image file equals volunteer, and we can get the image file. And once we have that, then we can work this kind of convoluted magic where we create a buffered image. And then we can create an image. Then we can set the image view to contain that image. What did we call it? We call it image view. Now, all of these are going to throw, well, not all of these, but this particular image IO has the ability to throw an IO exception, because anytime you read from the hard drive, it's possible that the file's not there, or it's possible that the the write permissions and read permissions aren't sufficient. So it's going to throw an exception. So we're going to catch that, and we'll just port it to the error stream. So now, when we edit a user, we should be able to see their image. Let's see here, edit volunteer. Oh, it says cannot read input file. Interesting. Okay. Let's take a look. When we get our volunteer, do we get the image file? Let's go to our volunteer table view controller. So when we select edit buttons pushed, volunteer equals volunteer. So let's look at what's created when we create a volunteer. So the way that that's happening is we have this method called load the volunteers. This updates our table. So here, when we create a volunteer, yeah, we do get their image file. So that should be a viable thing. Okay, so let's take a look here in our work bench. So Barney Rebel should have a custom image as well. So let's take a look at trying Barney Rebel, see if that works. Can't read the input file either. Okay. Interesting. So We could use the debugger, but let's just quickly print out the name of the file that we think the image is in. Start with just get name. So take a look in our file system here. HGNG. HGNG, there we go. So it looks like that's the Barney Rubble image, but it's not loading it for some reason. So let's try. Maybe we've just got like a the wrong information here on. So it's looking in the root directory. It's not looking in the src/images directory. So that's the problem. So we just need to update here where image file equals get image file. Okay. There we go. Seems like an awful lot of work. Okay, bit of a workaround, but let's see if that solves our problem. There we go. So it was just pointing to the wrong directory there. So now let's just clean up here. Get rid of that troubleshooting tool. Okay, so at this point in time, I'm going to go to edit a user. We can preload them. The image gets updated, and we can go in here and we can type in Frank if we wanted to. But when we hit save, something not so good is going to happen. We hit save. What happens is, if we look at our database, is Barney's left unchanged, and we get Frank with a default person image. So we actually have created a new entry in our database instead of updating an existing one. And part of that has to do with the fact that our save method, so let's go back into our new user view controller. If we look at our save method, that's preloading the data. We can close that now. When we look here, there's our save volunteer button pushed. you look at this method, what it does is it says, if the file's changed, create a new volunteer. Otherwise, create a new volunteer with the default image. We don't actually have a scenario where it's handling or recognizing that it should be an update versus a new user. So what happens is it creates a new volunteer, and then it inserts that into the database. So what we need to do is, first we need a method for our volunteer to be updated in the database. Right now we don't have that. And then we will need to actually create the code to use that. So what we can do is we can say if volunteer not equal to null. And remember, we have this global variable called volunteer now. Okay. If they do not equal null, it's a new volunteer, and we can do this. When we're done, we can go to our scene changer and update back to the table view. But for this one, we need to do some coding here. We need to figure out what we want to do to update our user. So let's go into our volunteer. This is our model class. So we had insert into database. Okay. So why don't we create another method that says update in database or something like that. So let's go down. There's the end of our method. Okay, so much like before, when we want to update the user or the volunteer, what we need to do is we're going to need to read from all the fields and update the user using a prepared statement. So to do this, we're going to use some of the same tools as before: connection, con, set equal to null initially. And we're going to need something called the prepared statement. Let's call it statement equals null. And in here, what we're going to do is we'll do a try. And this is where we're going to connect to our database, driver manager, connection. And here, we're going to pass in its Java database connector. We're looking at MySQL. And I'm going to use the local host. If you had a remote machine, you would use something else. It's going to be on port 3306. And we called our database volunteers. And my incredibly robust security is username and password, or sorry, student, and a password of student. And we'll have a finally block at the end. Finally. So this will always execute no matter what. So we say if connection does not equal null, then connection needs to be closed. And similarly, if the prepared statement does not equal null, then the prepared statement needs to close. Okay, so that's our connection, right? So step one. The database. Step two, we need to create a string. And what did we call in the database? Call it image file. Image file equals question mark. So these prepared statements, these question marks are basically placeholders. And this will allow, with the prepared statement, for the system to cleanse or validate these inputs to make sure they don't have SQL injection in them. We're gonna have so this method is going to basically set up a special way to review where each of these question marks are. And then in step 4 here, convert the birthday into a date object. Very similar to the insert. The difference here is we're going to say update instead of insert into, right? So we're going to say date. I'll call it birthday equals in step 5 into parameters. There is one thing we're missing here. It just occurred to me. As we're building this out, if we ran this command as it is, it doesn't actually identify which user to update. So it would actually update every user in our database. We need to do something else. We need to say where, what do we call it? Volunteer ID equals. We're also going to need to put in the volunteer ID. Okay, so we've got set string, and the first thing we're passing in is the first name. And then we will do the last name. The second question mark is the last name. And then the third item was the phone number. What do we call this? This phone number. And the fourth, whoops. And the fourth item is going to be our birthday. So here we're going to say set date, and it's number 4, and we'll pass in the birthday, and then prepared statement. Fifth one is going to be our image file. What do we call that? Okay, so here we call it's a file object. So it's image file, get name. And then the last thing that we have here is our volunteer ID. So integer, so item number 6, their volunteer ID. Okay, and then step 6, going to be running the update. So executing our update. So let me close it off. Now the volunteer has the ability to update the database. We just need to use this method when we recognize we need to do an update versus an insert. So let's go back to our new user view controller. And here we figured out, okay, this is when we need to edit slash update an existing user. So what we would do here is instead of running this particular command, right, we're going to say volunteer, because we already have all the information about the volunteer. We're going to say update in the database. Let's give this a try. Okay, so we click on Barney, click on edit. Now Barney had this image, so let's change the image. Okay, and we'll change the name to Roger Rubble. And we'll change the birth date to be 1999. So if we hit save, now when we go back in, we should be able to see Roger Rubbles, but we don't. We still see Barney Rubble. Oh, here's our issue. Unknown database volunteers. Let's go back into MySQL. We called the database volunteer. So here, try that one more time. Let's edit Barney. Call it the new name. Change the image just to make sure we can change the image from boat to a pool. Hit save. Doesn't like the phone. Unknown column phone, so that probably wouldn't have updated. Here we called it phone number. Okay, so Okay. So now let's see here. Still didn't update. Although it looks like it tried. Interesting. So, it's not updating our database. So let's take a look at this. Why not? So our volunteer object has the update command. It's able to connect to the database because it's not kicking us out. But it's not, okay, it's not getting the new information. And the reason it's not doing that is, let's just collapse these for a second. At the top here, when we first load, okay, just trying to make this easier to read for you. When we first preload our data, we set all these values for the volunteer. It's preloaded. And then the user types things into those fields and changes the image, but it doesn't actually go back and reset these values, right? So the volunteer that's loaded, it hasn't updated, it hasn't read from these fields that have changed. So let's do this. Let's create a keep this nice and compact. Before we do all of this, we really need to update the information for our users. So let's create a method that says update volunteer. And here we'll just go just thinking through this. This actually shouldn't be on the volunteer side. This should be on the new user view controller side. So here in our save, right? Here we should say update volunteer. And this method will read from the GUI and update our volunteer object. So now here, so again, we have this volunteer object, right? So what we want to do is we want to say set the first name to be, what did we call it? This dot name text field. So before we can store information about the volunteer, we have to actually update it first. So we're going to need to do this for all of the data points of a volunteer. So we need to set the first name, set the last name, what's next? First name, last name, phone number. The only thing that will not change is their ID. Birthday, and we called it what? We just called it birthday? I guess we did. Okay, so that's going to update all the fields with the new values. This is complaining. Oh, it's still up. Still upset. Oh, I'm too far. All right, let's try this. So I'll update Barney again. Start off with edited Barney, hit save. Now we can see that it's updated Barney. Let's test drive changing an image. And we'll change his birthday to 1999. And his phone number. Okay, so edited Barney Rebels. Phone number's changed, birthday's changed. And if we go back in, oh, interesting. Okay, so updating the image file didn't work. Everything else is now working. So that's our last thing we need to tackle is the image file. So let's take a look. Why didn't that update? So if we go to our new user view controller, why did that not see the new image file? And if we look on the hard drive, just refresh this. Okay, so it didn't even try to copy and store that. So when we update that image, what happens here? Choose image button is pushed. We load our file chooser. It returns a file. Temp image file, if it's not null, becomes our image file. So this part worked because the image changed on scene. So we have our image view, or sorry, our image file has the correct file in it. What do we do differently with save? We just passed in the image file. And then I think we had it set up so that the volunteer, when we hit save or insert into DB, So here we said set image file and then copy image file. So we don't have this piece happening when we set the image file. So we'll need to explicitly do that here in our new user view controller. So when we update this, we're also going to need to say volunteer copy image file. Okay, hopefully the last time. So that's new image. And now it's maintaining the image. And so there you have it. Now we have the ability to change scenes, edit users, and we are all set. I think. Yes. Okay. Very good. All right. Well, that's it for this video. Stay tuned for some more. Cheers.